Thank you very much. While we are in John 5 and while John 5 screaming out that Jesus is equal with God, I'll bring up verse 30 as well. It's very similar. By myself I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just. For I seek not to please myself, but him who has sent me. As Jesus says, by myself I can do nothing, he also expresses that his relationship to Father, in a sense, he's there to please God.
Yeah, and this goes back to some of what we were saying before. Yeah. We always have to keep in mind two truths that John has already told us about in the prologue. Yeah. Jesus is God, one in essence with the Father, John 1:1. Jesus is the source of all creation and life, the succeeding context. And that same Jesus became flesh. So Jesus is not only God, but a real human being. He condescended to become a human being, and he did so for us men and our salvation. And in discharging the work that was laid upon him as our incarnate Savior, Jesus necessarily submits himself to the will of the Father and does things to please the Father, and he's doing it for our sakes. So none of this is at variance with Christian theology. It's really a reflection of the fact that Muslims so often aren't willing to take into account what Christians actually believe. Right? They'll say they know that we believe Jesus is God incarnate, but then when trying to attack his deity, they'll pretend as if he's not incarnate, or as if he couldn't say anything consistent with the fact that he is a man or somebody who has become our mediator. Okay, so while it's certainly true that Jesus is God and has all authority, it's also the case that Jesus is a human being and is exercising that authority in the role or capacity of a mediator, right? And in that sense, Jesus speaks of doing nothing of himself or on his own initiative, but always judging. And this is not to say that this has no implications for our view of the divine persons, because, as I said before, this reflects the order or the relationships that obtain between the persons. Jesus is the eternally begotten Son of the Father. And so although he is essentially one with his Father, bears his Father's nature, he always acts from the Father, right? Within the Godhead, there is a certain definite ordering of their relationships. I'm not talking about a temporal order, like there was once a father and then later a son. That doesn't make any sense. You can't have a father without having a son. Those terms are correlative, right? So the Father and the Son are eternal persons, and they relate to each other in an eternal way, but that relationship is expressed in language that we understand in terms of fatherhood and sonship. And just as a son is somebody who always, a faithful son, a righteous son, a good son, always acts in perfect harmony with or in honor of his Father, so does Jesus, the second person of the Trinity. And so there isn't any problem here from the perspective of Christian theology. Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, and he acts from the Father. And in becoming flesh and submitting to the will of the Father for us men in our redemption, he always exercises his authority in submission to the Father.